That's interesting. Even that the resistance to the translation lasted multiple centuries. It wasn't a flash in the pan. It was an extremely dangerous act to translate the Bible into a vernacular language. And you've got to ask yourself why.
You're absolutely right, because it was Bishop Arundel, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who banned Wycliffe's Bible and prohibited that no one is allowed to translate the Bible into English without permission. So Tyndale spent a whole year knocking at the doors of 3 bishops, trying to get permission to translate the Bible into English. All 3 of them refused. So he became a refugee, which was also illegal to leave England without permission. He left England, went to Wittenberg, under Luther, began to translate the Bible, the New Testament. Then he came to Belgium. That's where he printed it to smuggle it into England. So anyone who was found 100 years earlier with a page of Wycliffe Bible hand copied, he could be burnt at stake because the church has banned translation of the Bible. So the Bible was an explosive, revolutionary book.
Okay, so let's go back to India then. So now you have the Muslims ruling India, and you have the Hindu gods or the Hindu kings ruling India, and it's a caste-structured society, and there's no shortage of oppression, and there's no real development at the individual level. And the British start a mercantile relationship. And then the biblical corpus enters the Indian landscape through the operation fundamentally of the British, but of missionaries, not the mercantilists per se.
Yes.
Although a fair number of the Christian-influenced British politicians were all already pushing favorably for India's independent development several hundred years ago, way before it actually happened.
Yes. Now, a few missionaries from Europe had come to South India before the British missionary movement got going. And they had begun to translate the Bible into some of the South Indian languages, etc. But this was small private initiative. The missionary movement per se got started only in 1793 when William Carey, a cobbler in England, he was a Baptist, so he was not allowed to go into Oxford or Cambridge. These were Anglican universities. So he taught himself while working as a cobbler, Latin, Greek, Hebrew, geography, politics, missionary history, etc. And he wrote a book, a small book, inquiring whether the contemporary church is under an obligation to go and evangelize the world, disciple all nations, or was that a command given only for the first generation of apostles? So his book, An Inquiry into Obligation of the Christians to Disciple All Nations, it's a very long title. That's what begins the modern missionary movement. But ironically, 1793, when his book is published, is the year when the British Parliament banned missionaries from going to India. So the British East India Company is governing Bengal, which includes Bangladesh, Assam, etc. That's a large part of eastern India. But missionaries are not allowed because evangelical movement is already creating problem for Africa, British rule in Africa, because British companies are bringing African slaves in British ships, selling them in Caribbean and South America, North America, and evangelical conscience, which believes that all human beings are equal, therefore slavery is immoral. They are creating problems. And it is the members of House of Lords in England who have stake in these companies. They don't want missionaries to go. We're having a good time in Africa and India. We're making a lot of money. We don't want morality injected into business.
Right, but it does get injected. Wilberforce manages it unbelievably well. And,
Yes.
One of the things that I've really been struck by lately is this postmodern and radical leftist insistence that exploitation is wrong. Think, well, why do you think exploitation is wrong? You have to buy the doctrine of the inalienable rights of the individual and the natural rights of the individual and the divine worth of the individual before slavery is wrong, and you don't buy any of that. But if you do buy it, you end up like Wilberforce, and you put yourself on the line to cost England a tremendous fortune over multiple decades to eradicate slavery around the world because of its moral inappropriateness, because of the sacred nature of each individual.
That's absolutely right. That if a woman is an animal and I can buy a cow, keep a cow in lock and chain and sell a cow, why can't I buy girls, keep them locked and sell them? Is a girl different than an animal? Does she have...
Yeah, and if power is if power is the only force that is real and the only force that's credible, then obviously you can buy and sell if you have the power to do it. You can only not do that in some fundamental sense if there's a transcendent order, let's say, that imbues each individual with fundamental worth.
The inalienable right to liberty, that a woman cannot be kept in cage because she is made in God's image, who is free.
Yeah.
So this.
Well, I've been thinking about that practically too. So imagine it this way. So the reason that you have the right to liberty is so that let's say you have the right to conscience, and you have the right to conscience so that you can make appropriate ethical decisions. And states depend on ethical individuals to make appropriate ethical decisions to keep the states from crumbling, which is basically the stories that go throughout the Old Testament, is that when all the individuals who make up a state become enslaved or become so corrupt that they no longer make appropriate decisions, the entire state is doomed and everybody collapses into slavery. And so you have your freedom, you have your liberty, not so that you can do whatever you want, but so that you can exercise your conscience in relationship to your, well, let's say, divine calling.
That's absolutely right. The idea of conscience is foundational to whole of Western political philosophy. That the reality is that in the human body, there is no organ called conscience. Conscience is an aspect of human soul, the spiritual dimension of a human being, where my conscience judges me, that you're lying, that you're shoplifting, you are a thief, you're a liar, you're a sinner. So conscience is the image of God in me, which can be corrupted, but can be reformed. So this is, of course, the fundamental source of liberty when 1521-22, Martin Luther is standing in the Diet of Worms. The emperor has called for Luther to be tried because the Roman Empire cannot be divided when the Turks are attacking it. He wants unity. So he wants Luther to explain himself. And he says, okay, these are your books? Yes, sir. And these are the books of the church fathers? Yes, sir. Your books contradict the books that the church fathers have written for a long time? Yes, sir, they do. So will you recant? He's not given an opportunity to defend himself. Because you are contradicting what the church fathers have said, you should recant. Otherwise, you are a heretic. That means that any Christian can kill you and will go to heaven. So Luther takes 24 hours, and that happened just 2-3 weeks ago, the 500th anniversary of the Diet of Worms, when Luther spends a whole night in prayer. That do I recant, save my life, or do I remain true to my conscience? So he makes that classic statement that it's not safe, it's not right to go against one's conscience. I will recant. I'm not being proud and arrogant. I will recant if you convince me from scriptures and plain reason. If not, I'm sorry, I can't recant. So help me God. That's
right. Here I stand.
Here I stand. So help me God. Now, that doctrine of conscience comes from, Paul uses the word repeatedly in his epistles, such as Timothy and Titus, that this is the true religion, not all the rituals, not all the sacraments, but to keep your heart clean, pure.
Right. It's the prophetic voice within, essentially.
Yes. So that then is debated, and John Milton, the Puritan poet, uses it in his argument for Areopagitica. In Areopagitica, when he argues for liberty, to even if I'm wrong, I should have the freedom to express my false ideas. You should counter my false ideas with arguments and evidence, not by the sword.
That's part of the refinement of conscience. You could say that.
So then at that time, during Oliver Cromwell's long parliament appoints Westminster Assembly of 70 or so theologians who write Westminster Confession. Chapter 20 is the chapter on conscience. So the parliament accepts Westminster Confession as the summary of biblical Christianity. And it was through that conscience enters the political philosophy of the West. The root of it goes back to 1528 sermon that.
And how does that parallel Wilberforce's emergence as an anti-slavery campaigner?
He comes to 300 years later. But the background of it is Martin Luther's sermon, which John Locke quotes in his letter concerning toleration, which James Madison, when introducing Bill of Rights in America, he quotes Martin Luther's sermon. It's called On Two Kingdoms. There are two kingdoms: kingdom of Christ, which has come into this world, and the kingdom of man. The emperor and the church, the pope, have authority over me in some areas, but the church doesn't own my soul. Emperor doesn't own my soul. If I have accepted Jesus as my Lord, it's God's kingdom has come into my heart. Christ is my Lord. He's the King of Kings. He's the ruler of the kings of the earth. Therefore, my heart belongs to Jesus.